Welcome and good evening to all of you. So, what I say. Now, most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with this term yoga. Yoga is becoming very popular all over the world, most of the United States and many other parts of the world. Yoga known as some kind of a physical exercise which helps you to keep your health intact, to keep your mind calm and quiet, which involves a number of physical exercises which completely overhaul the entire psychophysical mechanism. It's called Hatha Yoga. It's called different postures. Now, this yoga, which is called Hatha Yoga, a kind of physical exercise, is one minor aspect of yoga philosophy or yoga as a way of life. The exponent of this yoga was a great psychologist philosopher of ancient India who lived around 2200 BC. According to some historians, there are different views with regard to his period of life. His name was Patanjali. So this Hatha Yoga, which is now being practiced in many places and which is becoming popular all over this place, was first expounded by Patanjali as a tool, as a help to maintain physical health. To be more precise, as a way of exercise which helps us to keep our body calm, steady, without movement, so that we can concentrate on a spiritual ideal for a long time in a relaxed mode. This was the original purpose of this yoga. So, if I may be permitted to quote the original words, Sthiram Sukham Asanam. This is the definition in Sanskrit language of this Hatha Yoga, which is becoming popular. The meaning is this: a physical posture which helps you to sit quiet, steady, without movement of the body, of the head, and focusing our mind on a spiritual ideal. There is a stress on steadiness and relaxation. You should be able to sit steady. At the same time, you should not feel any strain. That's why Sukha means absolutely in a relaxed mode. One could sit for some time. Gymnastics do that. But if you sit with that kind of exertion for a long time, you feel the fatigue. You feel exhausted. You feel tired. So you should not feel tired or exhausted. You should be always in a relaxed mood, and we should be able to sit for a long time. This is the original purpose of the yogic exercises which are becoming popular in many parts of the world these days. The real yoga goes far beyond this. The real yoga is a method of mental exercise which helps us to bring out our inner resources, to bring out all the potentialities from within our mind, so that we can evolve into an integrated personality, complete integrated personality. We can reach the highest degree of perfection of all our skills, all our potential talents, abilities, and all possible skills that we have got. Not only physical skills, psychological, mental and spiritual potentialities. All can be brought out. All can be brought into manifestation through this yoga, so that we can have a integrated personality. So we can be free from stress, hypertension, and all other problems, which are sometimes called the problems of abundance, which are inevitable in modern workaholic age. Now, one may ask this question. This could be achieved through yogic postures or through breath control and similar exercises. It is true that if you practice breathing exercise after a long day of physical toil, you feel some peace of mind, no doubt. But then if there is a crisis, if there is a serious problem, again our mind will go back to its original state. These physical exercises do not help. So the great psychologist Patanjali has given us a solid philosophy of life, or a way of life based on yoga. So on the one hand, it helps us to bring out our inner resources. And on the other hand, it helps us to evolve into integrated personalities, to develop all our potentialities. Now, how do we do that? This great psychologist has given a series of internal and external disciplines which help us to evolve a very healthy philosophy of life, which help us to live in this world and at the same time to live a happy and spiritually contented life. These disciplines he calls yama and niyama. These are the Sanskrit terms, but I shall explain in English. Patanjali says the first step towards evolving an integrated personality is to follow a series of internal disciplines and external disciplines. These disciplines are called yama and niyama. See, the first one is yama, which consists of 5 factors: non-violence, truthfulness, non-covetousness, and then inner purity, the practice of mental purity, celibacy, control of the senses, that's what it means, and complete freedom from greed. These are the qualities that he establishes, that he outlines. Now, I can just at this stage, I would like to give a few interesting points which this great psychologist gives to the practitioners of Hatha Yoga. Now, those who practice pranayama, yogic exercises, you find the first result is that we feel physically invigorated. Our nervous energy, our mental energy, physical energy increases. This is the first result. The body generates a new way of energy resources. The moment you start practicing Hatha Yoga, yogic exercises, and especially when you start the practice of breath control, breathing exercises. Now, Patanjali says, anyone who follows any of these disciplines, breath control and Hatha Yoga, and who doesn't take care of the fundamental disciplines, may face a terrible problem. Because this energy, surplus energy, the surplus power that you generate, that your body generates, that your mind generates when you practice pranayama, is called breath control or breathing exercises, or yogic postures, this should be diverted towards creative channels. So before you obtain a fresh way of energy, a fresh way of physical and nervous energy, you must learn how to divert this energy and this power into creative channels. Now, these two kinds of disciplines help us to follow certain paths, certain methods which keep this energy from flowing through negative channels. I shall give an example. See, the first discipline which Patanjali, with the yoga philosopher, gives is ahimsa. Ahimsa is technically called non-violence. Non-violence is not just absence of violent deed or violent act. Non-violence as an attitude of our life or our mind, an attitude of life or attitude of mind, it's called non-violence. So it goes far beyond non-injury in a purely physical sense. Anyone who practices breathing exercises or breath control, before he gets fully established in non-violence, may become violent, because somebody who is extremely excited there are many people who are prone to sudden excitement and who may not have perfect control over the senses. If such people suddenly procure extra energy and extra power through these exercises, they may become more excited. It can lead to maniac problems. That's why Patanjali indirectly refers to certain psychological problems which can be called in the language of modern psychiatry as manic depressive psychosis, sudden outburst of violence, excitement, nervousness, etc. That is why, in fact, long back, when the great Swami, who was known as Swami Shivananda, he was the founder of Divine Life Society, which has got branches in many parts of the world. He was the first important spiritual personality in India who propagated these hatha yogic exercises, these physical exercises, pranayama, etc. So when his book became very popular in many parts of the world, people started facing problems because they started practicing all these complicated physical postures and also breathing exercises without caring for developing this inner discipline like non-violence, truthfulness, absence of greed and such qualities. So when this came to his notice, his first instruction was, you should stop all these practices. One should not practice complicated physical exercises and physical yogic postures and breath control without first developing certain important internal mental disciplines. Because these internal disciplines help us to divert the suppressed energy that is created through yoga and breathing exercises to flow through creative channels. At least it prevents us from prevents the energy from flowing through negative or harmful channels. So this is the first quality which the great philosopher Patanjali insists: non-violence. One should have a perfectly calm and quiet mind, and with no feeling of doing harm to anyone in this world. So it is not just non-injury or complete absence of any actions of a violent nature. It is beyond that, goes far beyond that. It is an attitude of mind that's implied by this word, ahimsa or non-violence. This idea was taken up by Buddha because Buddha was born almost 1400 years after Patanjali. So all these ideas were later taken up Buddha as part of the Buddhist creed in early days. The second teaching that Patanjali explains is truthfulness. Truthfulness means keeping our mind, keeping our thought, our deed and word in a straight line. Complete mental integrity. That's what is meant by truthfulness. Because any kind of deviation from truthfulness can again create a stumbling block in the practice of yoga. Because according to yoga philosophy, every human being is perfect by nature. Because of certain deeds, certain actions that we have done in this life or previous life, our true nature is clouded, concealed by some negative tendencies and impressions that have accumulated in our mind. So yogic practice helps us to weed out, to remove these negative tendencies and impressions and to bring out our true nature. So in other words, yoga is the pathway, it is a royal pathway towards freedom, towards internal freedom, spiritual freedom. In a way, it helps us to go back to our true original nature, which in Vedanta philosophy is called Atman or Supreme Consciousness. But for that, we have to practice meditation, we have to practice concentration. But to be able to practice concentration and meditation, we must first of all try to develop certain important disciplines. Then the third discipline that Patanjali speaks about is non-covetousness. I mean, we should not have any desire for anything that doesn't belong to us, that belongs to other people. So a complete detachment, a complete non-attachment towards anything which doesn't rightfully belongs to us. This is another important discipline which Patanjali insists. Because if you practice any kind of concentration or meditation, it sharpens our mind. Any kind of yogic practice will sharpen our faculties, mental faculties. You'll be able to concentrate and you'll be able to do things much better, much more efficiently, because mind becomes sharp. Normally, our mind is diverted towards external objects. External objects called, Vishayas called. Every minute, every second, all the five senses together drag our mind towards external objects. According to one great well-known work in Sanskrit language, that is a famous book, Viveka is called. So it draws a graphic picture of how mind is being dragged towards external objects. So this Sanskrit verse takes the example of 5 types of animals, 5 creatures. Each faces its death and destruction because its mind is being dragged towards external objects, because it doesn't have the power of concentration. The verse is this: Shabdadavi panjavi reva pancha panjattamapusa gunena baddhava guranga madanka padanka veenaha bhunga nara panjavi ranjidati. It's a Sanskrit verse, perhaps you may not remember, but it comes in a famous book called Viveka Chudamani. I shall explain in English. This verse gives a graphic description of how man faces his death and destruction. Spiritual death, mind, not physical death. Spiritual destruction, spiritual death, by becoming a victim of the senses, yoga helps us to get freedom from the senses. But natural instinct of human mind is to follow the dictates of the senses. If you give full freedom to the senses, then it leads to spiritual slavery. If you try to control your senses, it leads to spiritual freedom. So these two cannot go together. Complete freedom for the senses means spiritual slavery. If you could restrain your senses, it means spiritual freedom. So, first, this great poet takes up the example of a deer. Normally, deers, the story is taken from ancient times. Hunters used to go about hunting deers and different animals in forests. So they used to play music on a flute. Listening to this music, deers hiding in caves and bushes will come out. And at that time, the hunter will shoot his arrow and the deer will be killed. Now, because the deer falls a victim to its ears, it listens to the music and its mind and ears take the deer to the place from where the music is coming, and at that time it is shot and killed. And then that means we have 5 senses of perception. The deer faces its death because it falls a victim to its sense of hearing. Then the next example is taken from an elephant. Elephants normally walk in herds, in groups, and they touch each other. The sense of touch here becomes the cause of death of elephants. They touch each other and then they fall in a pit, and they are enslaved, they are caught, and they lose their freedom, and sometimes they die also in that pit. So another sense, that is that sense of touch, becomes the cause of death of the elephant. And then patanga means moths. During rainy season you find small insects, moths, they emerge from the soil, and when they see a blazing fire, they are attracted by the brilliance of the blazing fire, and they flock towards the fire and they are killed. So the sense of vision, the sense of seeing, the ear, the eyes become the cause of death of moth. And then the 4th creature that is mentioned is fish. Fishermen catch the fish with the help of a hook and a bait. So attracted by the smell of the bait, the fish is caught and he loses his freedom and it is killed. And then there are certain creatures which move from flowers to flower, attracted by the perfume of sweet smelling flowers. At that time, they are killed by some of the bigger creatures. So this great poet is here drawing a graphic picture of how each of these 5 creatures loses its freedom and is led to its death because it is trapped by one or other of the 5 senses of perception. Now the poet, after drawing this picture, he exclaims, see how terrible is the fate of human beings. Because human beings are simultaneously trapped by all the 5 senses. Every minute, every second, our mind is being dragged towards external objects by all these 5 senses. When we give freedom to the senses of perception drag our mind towards external objects. And that brings misery and spiritual slavery. Now, yoga helps you to gain freedom from the tyranny of these senses. Now, when we get established in the ideal of non-violence. We become established in a mental attitude which helps us from being dragged towards external objects of a violent nature. Again, when we get established in the ideal of truthfulness, we are naturally protected towards different objects of pleasure, because it is our desire for objects of pleasure that brings spiritual slavery and all the misery, all the problems associated with that. So also, covetousness also is another important cause of spiritual slavery. And sensual, and the desire for sensual pleasure. And another important character, another important quality which is necessary for every practitioner of yoga is absence, complete absence from greed. Complete absence from greed. Because if anyone is attached, if he is desirous of getting anything beyond what he needs, it is greed, and that will make him or her a slave of activities, senses, which bring those objects of desire. We become slaves of different objects of pleasure and desire. So that means tyranny of the senses and spiritual slavery. So Patanjali says the first step for anyone who is trying to evolve a healthy philosophy of life is to get established in these 5 disciplines. This is the first step. I shall deal with the other 5 important disciplines. But before that, there are a few points to be remembered. In Vedantic tradition, one can start practicing these disciplines any time, at any stage of his or her life. People sometimes wonder, well, I can't practice this kind of disciplines. It is impossible for us to continue the practice of these disciplines in this world of science and technology, with the demands on our life, on our time. Very often our problem is that we won't get enough time to concentrate on these ideas, on efforts to develop these qualities in this practical world, in which we have to work so hard and for so many hours every day. No, Vedanta gives a great promise in this context. One can make an attempt to practice this at any stage, even if we cannot fully get established in this. If the least effort to develop these qualities will not be lost. That's why in the Gita, Arjuna puts a question to Krishna. He asks a question to Krishna. Gita is, of course, many of you know, it's an important philosophical and spiritual text which is universal in nature, which is in the form of a dialogue between 2 great men of action, which deals with certain problems, practical problems of everyday life, and it just got a universal relevance and significance. Arjuna puts a question to Krishna. Now, what happens to a person who tries to practice some of these disciplines, yogic disciplines, and if he fails, or if he dies away, if he dies before he succeeds in getting established in these disciplines? No, Krishna says, even if you try a little, and even if you succeed a little, it will remain intact. Because according to Patanjali and according to Vedantic tradition, life is not one. Life and existence are conceived as cycles, not as straight line. It's not that you have got one chance in life. If you don't succeed here, you are lost or damned once for all. Not at all. Even if you try to practice little of discipline in our everyday life, in our work qualities, that little practice will remain intact. And even if you don't succeed and if you die, in the next life, we will be able to start from where we have left in this life. That's the answer which Krishna gives. A very, very, very important principle to remember, because the concept of existence in Abrahamic religious tradition is in terms of straight line progression or linear progression. But in Vedantic tradition or the tradition of yoga philosophy, the concept of existence and the concept of life is explained in terms of a cycle. So the journey never comes to an end in this life. Till we reach perfection, the existence or life continues. So even if we practice a little, even if we make an effort to practice a little, even if we listen once in this life to one lecture on these ideas, and if we try to concentrate and imbibe these ideas, and then if we don't have any contact with these ideas, that will remain intact. And sometimes maybe not in next life, but in some life, maybe after several centuries, if there is a similar opportunity, and if you try to listen to these ideas, suddenly you find these ideas, I got a special attraction for it. That is because these ideas are closely related to the concept of law of karma and rebirth. These are two important things you have to remember. We don't have just one life. Life is not just one straight line. You move in one line. At the end of the journey, either you go to hell or heaven. Not at all. Patanjali doesn't accept that view. Even if you try to practice a little of non-violence, non-covetousness, truthfulness, and even if you don't succeed, even if you do not completely succeed, still if you make a sincere effort, that effort will bear its fruits, if not in this life, in the next life. So Gita says, Sulpam apyasya dharmasya trayate mahato bhaya. In the 6th chapter, Krishna makes another statement. How does it happen? He says, in answer to Arjuna's question, Ayadis Shraddhayopedo yoga charidamanasaha aprapi yoga samsiddhim kamgadim Krishna gecchati. It's a famous verse. Kachinno bhavibrashta chinnabhramivanasyati apradishto mahabhako vimudho brahmanapati. There is I shall explain in English. I'm just quoting this verse just to help you, so that if you happen to read to this record later, you can read original verse. It comes to the 6th chapter of Gita. Arjuna puts a question, Krishna, if I try to practice yoga, any of these disciplines in this life, and if I don't succeed, what will happen to me? Don't you think that my fate will be similar to the fate of a piece of cloud which gets separated, which gets detached from a mass of clouds? He compares it to stick. So you'll be lost in this life and you'll be lost next life. I have tried to practice yoga in this life, I didn't succeed. And because I tried to practice yoga, I could not pay full attention to my material progress, to promotion, to job security, to getting more money, etc. So because I paid a lot of attention to the practice of yoga, Krishna says it won't happen. Krishna says, sometime in future, you will get an opportunity to renew your contact with these great ideas. So, tatradam buddhi samyogam hriyade pauradehya means you have accumulated, you have acquired certain great characteristics, impressions and tendencies by coming in contact with these spiritual ideas in this life. In the next life or next after next life, these accumulated tendencies and impressions will come to the surface. And when you get an opportunity to renew your contact with these spiritual ideas, it will bear fruits. So nothing will be lost, and you are never late, never too late. That's the message of yoga. So one can start his or her practice anytime. So the first 5 disciplines are this. They are general disciplines which are meant for all people. One is, one should try to practice non-violence, or a tendency not to do deliberately, not to do any harm to anyone. That's enough. And then freedom from sensuality as far as possible. That's all we can say in modern society. Freedom from covetousness, greed, and so on. And truthfulness. Then Patanjali speaks of 5 disciplines, which are specific disciplines. The first discipline that he says is a must for any practitioner of yoga is purity. Physical purity and mental purity. So, mind should be kept pure as far as possible. As I said earlier, every minute, every second, all the 5 senses are trying to drag the mind towards their respective objects. Ears and mind together come in contact with the sound, and as a result of it, we come to know of the existence of something which produces sound. So, the object which produces sound fills the mind, so it gets registered there. Even if you are listening to the lecture, if there is sound coming from outside, if our mind and ears, senses of hearing, go there, we come to know of the object which produces sound. So also when mind and eyes come together, we see an object and mind is dragged towards it. Similarly, when mind and the sense of touch come together, our mind is being dragged to that object which we touch. So also, the mind and the sense of smell come together, mind is dragged towards the object from which the smell is coming. And also taste. If you swallow something unconsciously without mental awareness, you won't feel the taste. But when mind and the sense of taste come together, mind is being dragged towards the object which has got a specific taste. Now, we may argue that we cannot artificially, physically withdraw these 5 senses from their respective objects. If we try to close our eyes, trying not to see an object, we'll be seeing only that object at a mental level. Because seeing with eyes open and seeing with eyes closed are the same. Very often we can see things with eyes closed. It's called either recollection, reflection, or memory, or dream in all these cases. But that has got the same effect. So, we cannot physically try to withdraw the senses of perception from their respective objects. What we can do, we can divert these 5 senses towards spiritually useful, spiritually healthy, helpful objects. Instead of seeing things which are spiritually harmful, we must take care to see only those objects which are not spiritually harmful. And similarly, we should only hear those things which will not create tension or confusion in mind, which are not spiritually harmful. So also all the 5 senses should be diverted. Their operations, their movements, their functions should be diverted towards certain channels which are not spiritually harmful, which are spiritually helpful. So in this way, we can concentrate more and more on the spiritual idea. That's the idea behind. For that, one can select an object for focusing or concentration. One can repeat a holy mantra, or you can, those who believe in God, it's very easy. They can meditate on that ideal of God. Those who do not believe in God, they can concentrate on a high sublime ideal. So any of this can become a focus of attention. So instead of trying to physically withdraw the senses from their respective objects, what we must do is that we must try to divert the functions of the senses towards certain channels which are not harmful to spiritual life. Instead of reading books which contain ideas which are unhealthy and which are harmful to spiritual life, we must read those books which feed our mind with positive ideas, positive tendencies, and with ideas which are helpful in spiritual life. For that, we need purity. So this purity is the first of the specific disciplines. So I mentioned the 5 general disciplines earlier, non-violence, etc. The first specific discipline is purity, mental purity and also physical purity. The second discipline is a goal and also a means. It is technically called, it is contentment. In Sanskrit it is called santosha. It is not satisfaction, because satisfaction is superficial. The satisfaction that you derive when you get something which is empirical, which is not everlasting, will be succeeded by dissatisfaction. Anything which is of a fleeting nature may give us some satisfaction, but that satisfaction will not remain for long. Immediately it will give way to dissatisfaction. When the object which gives us satisfaction is lost, it leads to dissatisfaction. So contentment is mentioned. Contentment means that mental attitude which normally comes to us when we get something. When we go, I have got something, there is nothing beyond this that I can look for, that I can aspire for. The highest contentment comes only when we get spiritual enlightenment. It is the goal of yoga. It is called samadhi in the yoga tradition. I will deal with that subject later. Absolute contentment comes only when we reach this high level of inner contentment, which is possible only when we reach the level of samadhi. We will deal with that subject in the following classes. But what is required in the beginning is, when we try to practice a little of these internal disciplines that I mentioned earlier, our mind assumes an attitude of inner contentment. A feeling comes to us that there is nothing beyond this that I should seek. There is nothing beyond this that I should aim at, that I should try to get. That inner contentment comes. And this contentment comes even if you step into the path of yoga. If a sincere spiritual seeker tries to practice a little of the first discipline, immediately contentment comes. So I can give you the example of Mahatma Gandhi. Maybe the only great spiritual discipline that Mahatma Gandhi sincerely tried to practice was non-violence, and reached the highest perfection in that area. Or anyone who practices any of these inner disciplines, it gives us a tremendous sense of inner contentment. Now, this is the second important discipline. The third discipline is concentration. Concentration naturally comes when our senses are diverted towards creative channels. When senses do not drag the mind towards external objects which create confusion and perplexity, and when senses are naturally drawn towards spiritually useful channels, it normally brings a degree of concentration. I have made an attempt to outline some aspects of yoga. There are other important subjects that we will discuss in the following weeks. Yoga can be practiced by anyone. There are people who are of an active nature, who don't much care for inner discipline, meditation or concentration. They can also become great yogis. They can divert their characteristic, their active characteristic, their tendency to constantly be active can be diverted towards yoga. They can get established in yoga. It's called karma yoga, where action becomes a tool for the practice of yoga. And there are many people who are of an intellectual turn of mind, who won't care for emotional disciplines of devotional nature, who are not of an active type, who are of a rationalist type, philosophers. They can practice jnana yoga. So, and again there are people who are not interested in any of these things. They want to achieve mental purity, mental concentration. They are not interested much in doing physical work. They can practice Raj Yoga. And there are people who are of an emotional nature, who are devotees, who regularly go to places of worship and pray to God. They can practice the path of devotion. That is also another yoga. So yoga, the goal of yoga can be achieved through any of these four means, depending upon the temperament, the aptitude and taste of spiritual seekers. Yoga is a very broad topic. It's so universal. It has got an avenue, it has got scope, it gives scope to everyone. Anyone, whatever may be his attitude, taste or temperament, can practice one or other type of yoga. I have tried to give a brief outline in this first class. Now I would like to invite suggestion from you. We can have a detailed discussion for more than half an hour. And if you want me to deal with certain specific topics related to yoga, I can do that in the succeeding weeks. Or if you want me to continue the same format, I can do accordingly. So you are most welcome to give your suggestions, to ask questions, so that we can have a detailed discussion on these topics.
As far as I understand, Atmaram Swami was the author for Hatha Yoga. Patanjali is the author for Ashtanga Raja Yoga. Am I right?
Yes. Now, Hatha Yoga is explained in two famous books. One is Hatha Yoga Pradipika and Gheranda Samhita. These two books give detailed descriptions of different postures. But these books are based on the concept of physical postures, which Patanjali mentions only in one sutra.
Right.
And that sutra Patanjali says is Sthira Sukham Asana. Asana is the word. Now, in Gheranda Samhita and Hatha Yoga Pradipika, they describe hundreds of postures. And according to mythological belief, there are thousands of postures. I won't go into those details. But 84 important postures are explained graphically by the authors of Gheranda Samhita and Hatha Yoga Pradipika. But all these ideas are built on the original genesis of the very concept of Hatha Yoga, which is this sutra. They themselves acknowledge that. They expanded this. Patanjali only wanted that we should be able to sit for a very long time. Sitting, in the sitting posture, you should be able to forget you have a body. That was the goal of Patanjali. You should be able to sit for a long time in a relaxed mood, and you should be able to transcend your body consciousness. That was the goal of Patanjali. So if one practices all these yogic postures, one will be able to sit for any length of time and still not be aware of the existence of the body. And again, another point which the authors of Vedanta Samhita and Hatha Yoga Pradika mention is, it helps you to be free from all diseases. Because any kind of physical diseases will drag your mind to body consciousness. See, when you sit, if you have a stomach pain, then the body will tell you, see, you have a body. That's why you feel the stomach pain. So body should be completely free from all diseases. So that you will forget the body. Body becomes your slave. With this purpose, Hatha Yoga was later developed into vast science. And in later years, there are many Swamis wrote this book. The nucleus, the fundamental books are this Vedanta Samhita and Hatha Yoga Pradipika. So, and based on these books, a number of books were written in later years by great writers.
Then what do you mean by Raja Yoga then?
Raja Yoga is the whole of Patanjali. See,
Yeah.
Hatha Yoga is one aspect of Raja Yoga.
Mm-hmm.
Raja Yoga means, it is called Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, complete cessation, control of the internal tendencies, mental tendencies. Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha means complete cessation of all inner tendencies. You should be able to become completely free from all impressions. That is the goal of Raja Yoga. The same as Raja Yoga, Ashtanga Yoga, of which Hatha Yoga forms one aspect. But the idea contained in this one sutra was later developed into huge science, which is now known as Hatha Yoga, by these two great sages. The authors of Vedanta Samhita and Hatha Yoga Pradipika, which were later expanded into much bigger branches of learning. Many have written, many have expanded. Later, many more asanas were developed, and so there are. Any traditional yoga teacher will tell you there have been thousands of yogic postures. At least a few hundreds are well known these days. Yes. Any other?
Maharaj, you mentioned about the 5 disciplines that one should follow. Out of them, one was the control of senses. So, what kind of practices one should follow to, maintain control of senses?
Yes. Of course, I didn't complete the 2 broad branches of disciplines. I didn't complete the subject of Niyama because we didn't have enough time. In Niyama, there are a few important points mentioned. One is Swadhyaya, means reading of good books. So, one important channel is mind is always being dragged by the 5 senses towards objects of desire. Now, so mind is like a bag. It has so many tendencies, different impressions. Some of them are good, some of them are not good. Now, it's a mixed bag. So, one method is to go on feeding the mind with healthy ideas. Which are helpful in spiritual life. And Swadhyaya, or reading of sacred books, holy books, belonging to any religion or belonging to no religion, are equally helpful. Because that brings good ideas, healthy ideas, spiritual ideas to the mind. So, as you go on in a quantity of spiritually useful, spiritually helpful ideas in the mind slowly becomes detached from the harmful objects of desire, and mind slowly becomes tuned to a spiritual idea. We have not finished that subject, That we'll deal with the next class.
In preparation for the next class.
Okay. One book I would recommend is Swami Vivekananda's complete works, because Swamiji has interpreted in a very informal, First volume. Rajya Yoga lectures. I mean, there's a long introduction, then there's a commentary on all the sutras. First volume, Swami's complete works. That is a very informal and very scientific. And Swamiji has interpreted the whole range of yoga philosophy and yoga way of life with Western readers in mind. It will be very helpful.
You can get it on the internet.
Yeah, thank you.
Internet, you can get in from San Francisco Monastery. You have a bookstore there.
Oh, this is
Yes. Chitta Vritti Nirodha. So, usually when we meditate, we think of somebody we adore, like Ramakrishna or Krishna, whoever, the God, Jesus. But so basically we are trying to focus our mind onto a particular thing. But Nirodha means it's like not to think of anything. So how does these two concepts,
Yes. Yes, Patanjali explains this point. Normally when we look at something, a visual object, our mind takes the form of that object. That's why we are able to recognize it. So also when we, at that split second, when we hear an object which is making a sound, and when our mind is drawn towards the object, our mind takes the form of that object, it produces the mind. So whatever the mind is drawn towards, it assumes that form. Now, every split second, every minute, our mind is being dragged towards diverse objects by all the five senses of perception. Then mind is highly distracted towards manifold objects which our five senses bring to the mind. Now, when you try to meditate on one sublime idea, a form of a spiritual personality or incarnation or a great principle, whatever it is, mind assumes that form. So it is withdrawn from the manifold diverse objects, in the external world. So mind is drawn towards a sublime spiritual idea, and mind assumes that form. So at the end of this process, we call samprajnata samadhi, savikalpa samadhi, the Patanjali says, you reach communion with that spiritual ideal which you concentrate. When you reach the highest degree of perfection in that meditation, we call samadhi. And at the next stage, that object also vanishes. Where if you concentrate more, again that object also vanishes. Then your mind is fully establishing asamprajnata samadhi. Then you can find this. But even if you reach that very high level of concentration by completely focusing and concentrating on one spiritual personality or one spiritual ideal, you are successful because you have succeeded in withdrawing the five senses and mind from the diversity of objects, the external world. That's a great success. So a point of concentration or focusing is essential for every spiritual seeker at the beginning. One should not think of going beyond that. One should try to get established in that idea. Because once you get fully established, according to Vedanta tradition, at the next stage, you reach the level of identity, the experience level of identity between the meditator and the object of meditation. That's the highest level.
Oh, so you cannot jump to the next level. You have to go through the...
Yes, according to yoga tradition, you have to do that. Yoga is accepted in Vedanta also. It's an important tool for reaching that level of purity.
So Maharaj, when you mentioned about the cessation of tendencies, so when that happens, does that create a void, or what takes place at that point?
Yeah, it is not voidness. Rather, what is our mind? Mind is defined in Vedanta as a function of tendencies and impressions. I shall give you an example. See, when you see an object from a distance, say a pillar, you are not sure where that object is if there is not enough light. Your mind will speculate, is that a pillar or the form of a human being or a tree, like that. Your mind speculates. At that stage, the mental impressions are functioning at the level of mind. So that's why in Sanskrit it's called Sankalpa Vikalpatmika Antakarana Vrittihi Mana. Mind is defined as the function of tendencies operating at the level of speculation. Whether that object is a pillar, a post, a human being or a tree, etc. When you reach that object, then you identify, this is a pillar. Then your intellect operates. Okay. Now, in fact, when these tendencies and impressions cease to exist, there is no mind. Because mind is a mind only so long as it is turned outward. The very essential nature of mind is that it is always turned outward. The moment tendencies and impressions cease to exist, mind becomes non-mind. Then it is the same as Atman, supreme consciousness. This is very, very important principle. So mind should not be considered to be an entity. It is the function of human impressions at one level. Intellect, we call buddhi, also another function of impressions. Ego feeling. Well, this is the post which I saw. I saw this last week. There your aham, that means your ego personality takes over. So the impressions or tendencies which function at the level of the ego. Oh, I saw this object last week. It is called aham or egocentricity. And when you remember, this post I saw last week, I saw this last week, then another function of mental impressions is operating in the form of memory. So, because in other words, mind is one form of function of tendencies and impressions. And mind is mind only so long as it is turned towards external objects, so long as it flows towards external objects. And the moment impressions cease to exist, mind no longer flows towards external objects, then mind is not mind, it is Atman. Because
so is it the highest stage? Or
this is the highest stage.
So in that case, to reach to that point, when they talk about the purifying the mind,
Yes.
instead of ceasing the mind, cease to exist.
That's the highest philosophical ideas cannot be expressed in language. There is always a big problem for language to express the highest metaphysical ideas. This problem does exist. So there is no other way but use attaining mental purity, etc. That's because there is no other way to explain it. Attaining mental purity means purging the mind of all the tendencies, which means it's no more mind. That's the language used. And in other ways, attaining mental purity, another interpretation is filling the mind with positive ideas all the time. So that mind becomes ready to turn inward. When mind is full of ideas which normally drag it towards external objects, it is impure. When mind is no more dragged towards external objects of desire, then it normally turns inward. and then it is no more mind. See, at the highest samadhi level, there is no mind. Why? Because you are not aware of any external objects.
So at that time the I-ness, if the mind is not there, then the I-ness belongs to the mind, right? So that means the I-ness also goes away.
Yes. I-ness is also one aspect of mind. I should explain this brief description in Vedanta. See, our impressions, tendencies, all these constitutes a particular entity which is technically called in Sanskrit Vedanta and also in Yoga. It's called Antakarana. Means, sometimes it is translated in English as internal organ. But it's better to explain it, then you will understand what it is. By defining, by naming, we won't understand it, only by explaining. Antakarana, it has got 4 compartments. It is very simple to understand. I explained mind with the help of an analogy here, example. When you see an object in front of you, when you are not sure what the object is, your mind speculates. Is it a pillar or a post or a human being? Suppose you see an object in semi-darkness, you can't see clearly. So before you come close to that object, your mind speculates. What is that object? Then it is mind that is functioning. So your mental impressions are functioning at the level of mind. It is mind which speculates. And when you reach that object, your buddhi or intellect tells you, oh, it is a pillar, not a human being or a tree. At the third stage, oh, this is something which I saw yesterday or last week. So you remember that pillar which you saw last week. It is called Chittam, in which all memories and impressions are stored. I saw it last week. There you are identifying yourself as somebody who saw it last week. It is Aham. So these 4 compartments are put together. It is called, in Sanskrit, it is called Antakarana. We can say internal mechanism. Internal organs it is called. That's the only way it is translated by Indian authors and also Western authors. There are hundreds of books written on this in English language. That's the only way. But it can be understood only by explaining it. Now, when you reach the highest level of transcendental experience, all these 4 functions cease to exist. And Patanjali and also Vedantic philosophers give 2 important symptoms of a great person who has achieved this. One, he becomes a universal person. He starts looking upon entire humanity as one spiritual family. He won't see any distinction or any kind of... Internally, he becomes a universal person. He looks upon entire humanity as one spiritual family. These are the signs. Because when you go beyond these 4 compartments, then you have gone beyond the tendencies and impressions. There are 4 levels of functions of tendencies and impressions. Mind is not something, mind should not be identified as an entity, as a tangible entity. Functions of impressions.
What is the second symptom? You said only one.
This is one. Second point is, he realizes that the supreme consciousness is the immanent reality existing everywhere. Because when he transcends these 4 levels of functions of impressions, Yoga, Chitta, Buddhi, means Samadhi level, he looks upon entire humanity as one spiritual family. And he also experiences the presence of the immanent principle. It's called God in theistic religious tradition, whether in Hinduism, Christianity, Islam, not in Buddhism, in all theistic religions, it is that reality is called God. This spiritually enlightened person realizes the existence of the immanent reality, consciousness, in all beings. So there is an internal growth, there is also an external growth. Internally he feels the presence of the Supreme Consciousness within him, and externally he feels the presence of the same reality as the omnipresent Supreme Consciousness.
So is that something, sorry, in that case, when the mind does that, like your perception, so you're clarifying your perception, you're purifying, or whatever term that we use, that means we see everything in its true nature. Is that something when the mind ceases to exist? Are you projecting something outside?
You are not
In that
projecting.
sense, so how do you see that everything is one?
Well, it is, we see diversity and manifoldness only at a mental level. See, as consciousness, existence is one. As mind, as intellect, as egocentricity, world is manifold, pluralistic. As consciousness, what we call Atman, existence is one. The same consciousness is present as the immanent principle in everything in this world. But as minds, there is manifoldness. So when you transcend mind, then you are identifying yourself with that transcendental reality, which is consciousness. Then you realize, on the one hand, you realize that the presence of that immanent principle within you, and you also realize the same immanent reality, immanent principle is omnipresent, all-pervading reality. So one's perfect identity with the entire universe.
So that means it's through elimination process. So only thing remains is everything is one.
It is not logical elimination. It is a journey through the path of experience. Ultimately you have to remember, it is a matter of experience. Because logic and philosophy and language cannot come very close to explaining experience. Experience can only be experienced. Experience can never be explained. But the best way to understand this is to read the lives and teachings of great spiritual personalities who have reached that level. Then you can find a universal humanistic feeling, understanding, broad-mindedness. See, in fact, that's why Patanjali says, so non-violence is a discipline that you have to practice at the beginning. Non-violence at the highest level becomes a natural characteristic of a spiritual personality who has reached the supreme goal. It is a characteristic that we have to develop at the beginning. But in its highest, most sublime form, it becomes natural for all great spiritual personalities. So all great spiritual personalities are universal. They're broad-minded. They look upon entire existence as one. That's the idea. So otherwise I will continue the subject because now we don't have much time. I thought this is, if you have any suggestions as to the format or the method of the exposition, you can give us suggestions. Any other?
Swamiji, I was late. Excuse me. Sorry. So the class begins at 5.
5.
And then you lecture until...
Yes, up 1 hour lecture and then half an hour question and answers.
Okay. And will you be doing a meditation after that, or...?
No, it concludes at 6:30.
Okay.
And I would like to say a few things about this, the philosophical heritage of the yoga, because that's very important. As I said, because I began with Hatha Yoga, because whenever you talk about yoga, that's very popular here, so that's why I began with that. Now, this Raj Yoga is part of yoga philosophy. Its great exponent was Patanjali. There are many views and opinions among historians as to the period of his lifetime, but many of them agree that he lived around 2200 BC. That's one estimate. There are different views. Now, in India's philosophical tradition, there are 12 schools of thought. I won't give the list here because I don't want to confuse you, and but still sometimes it may be useful to you. 6 schools are called theistic schools. 6 schools are called atheistic or heterodox schools. 6 schools are called orthodox schools of philosophy. And the other 6 are called heterodox. Sometimes it's called theistic and atheistic. Theistic school doesn't imply that the particular school of philosophy accepts God. God is not a point of consideration in deciding whether a school of philosophy is theistic or atheistic, heterodox or orthodox. If a school of philosophy accepts Vedas as supreme authority, then that school is called orthodox or it's called orthodox. But no, it should not be taken in its negative connotation. It means a school of philosophy which accepts Vedas as the supreme authority. So there are 6 schools. These are called, the school of ritualists called Mimamsaka and Vedanta. 2, Nyaya, the logical school, Vaisheshika, the other logical school, and Patanjali's yoga, and Sankhya's philosophy. These are the 6 schools which belong to the orthodox tradition or theistic tradition. And Patanjali's school of philosophy belongs to the theistic tradition. The 4 schools of Buddhism, Jaina, and Indian materialism belong to the heterodox branch. I will go into details about that. So Patanjali's system is called yoga philosophy, is one of the theistic schools of Indian philosophical tradition. And what he is trying to do is to give a very rational and descriptive analysis of the workings of human mind. What are the stumbling blocks for any spiritual seeker who tries to meditate, who tries to go beyond the empirical, the physical, the present, and who tries to get a peep into the transcendental? And the first principle, as Patanjali says, that one should be able to withdraw one's senses from external objects. This is the first discipline. And to achieve this, Patanjali doesn't advise you to physically withdraw your senses from external objects. What he is saying is that you should divert these senses towards creative channels so that they don't create problems for the mind when you are trying to meditate. The word yoga itself, it means joining, coming together, putting together. Because Patanjali's greatest contribution was his analysis of the superconscious. That was the greatest contribution that he's made. If you read Patanjali's philosophy, you will understand he divides the entire human personality into 3 levels of consciousness. The conscious level in which we are normally operating, the unconscious level which is trying to influence our actions, and the superconscious level which modern psychology has not tried to analyze, which is the transcendental level. So, it is something like this. Suppose there is a lake and you want to irrigate the field, but there is there's a huge piece of timber which blocks the flow of water from the lake or the canal to the field. By removing this stumbling block, which stands in the way of flow of water, we can get the field properly irrigated. Now, yoga helps you to remove this stumbling block. Because we are always, our conscious mind is always dominated by the unconscious. So you can feel that in our daily life. Many of us want to do certain things. Many of us are desperately wanting to do certain noble things. But you always find there is another counter mind which is trying to block it. You may call it procrastination, laziness, or sometimes called. And Patanjali doesn't believe in a personalized evil. Patanjali says there are obstacles in spiritual life. You have to remove these obstacles. So, by practicing yoga, by trying to connect our conscious mind to the superconscious, we can remove this stumbling block. And we can help the water to flow to the field that we want to irrigate. So there is this stumbling block, this unconscious, which is blocking the link between the superconscious and the conscious. So once we succeed in removing this bar which is blocking the flow of water, through yoga, we can reach to the level of superconscious. This is a short description of Patanjali's approach. So we sometimes fail in doing certain things that we want to do because of the influence of the unconscious. What is unconscious? Unconscious is nothing but a bag of tendencies and impressions of past karmas or actions in not only in this life but also in previous life, which drag our mind in one direction, though consciously we want to move in another direction. So once we succeed in removing the obstacle in the form of the unconscious, and once we succeed in creating a link between the conscious and the superconscious, we can spiritualize our entire life and reach our goal. This is a short description of Patanjali's scheme. I will deal with the subject in the coming section. So thank you. Om Shanti.